Hey, I'm Lorelei, registered dietitian nutritionist. Welcome to my kitchen. Today's video is going to be a recipe video. I'm actually following a recipe that I found online. Usually I'm the kind of person who just sort of looks at what I have in my fridge and figures out what I want to make and then just pull it together. But I know a lot of people are very insistent on specifically following recipes. I think it's good for both kinds of people to kind of change things up from time to time. So if you always follow recipes, I think it can be helpful to learn how to be a little more improvisational in your kitchen. But if you're like me and you always just kind of improvise, it can also be really helpful to actually follow recipes from time to time because you can learn new techniques, you can find new combinations of ingredients that you might not normally think of, and you might just surprise yourself with something that comes out of your kitchen that maybe is really different from what you ordinarily make. Today, I'm going to be making a beet curry. I actually make a lot of beet recipes. Hey baby, are you going to help me cook today? Because we got to get going on the dinner.
Seems like you've done all the hard part first already.
Yeah, I did all the chopping. There's a lot of chopping involved in this recipe, which I will link in the description for this video, but I thought, I would time myself to see how long it would take me to chop, because maybe it was only like 10 minutes and I was just making a big deal out of it. Mm-hmm. But it took me like a half an hour to chop everything.
I'm excited to see how this scurry turns out.
It's a curry.
You said we were having scurry.
What is a scurry?
That's what I was really excited to see. That's why I kind of came scurrying in here. Is it like a salsa and a curry? Because I really want you to make salsa at some point.
It's a curry, like we're using curry powder.
But I heard scurry. So could you make it a scurry?
Well, we can try to make it in a hurry. That rhymes. That's close enough, right?
Okay, my work here is done.
Yeah. Hey! Don't you want to talk about your favorite ingredient, beets?
There's a conspiracy.
I've actually made a lot of things with beets on this channel so far. I made beet salad.
Yes.
I've made beet smoothies.
Witness.
I've made beet hummus.
This is the conspiracy.
I've made Christmas cookies out of beets.
See, once you ingest a critical mass of the beet fruit, it sends its spores into your brain.
They get into your head and they never let you go.
You like the taste of beets and you want to eat more of them, and thus you make the beets happy. But they won't be happy in a scurry.
They might be.
Because that will get the spices all out of them.
Happy in a curry. Part of the reason why I chose this recipe is because it is a combination I've never heard of. Like beets, yes. Curries, yes, but I've never really had a beet curry.
A scurry. We'll call it a scurry.
Okay.
And make a salsa sometime soon. So yay!
Thank you for sharing your preferences, Joe. Well, okay, so all of this stuff is chopped, and the majority of your hands-on time will be spent chopping with this particular recipe. And that's true with a lot of vegetable-based recipes. But you know, grab yourself a glass of wine, put on some nice music or a podcast, and just get down to the chopping. There are worse things in the world, and it can be a little meditative if you let yourself get into it and allow for the time. Once that's done, then the recipe just kind of pulls itself together. So I've got a pot back here. I'm gonna add the vegetable oil, which is like a tablespoon. I'm using olive oil today. Tablespoon of olive oil going into the pot, heating it up. The first ingredients I'm gonna add are the beets and the carrots, and then some of the curry powder. So here's one thing I don't like about recipes. As I'm reading this recipe, I see it says, add beets and carrots and 2 tablespoons of the curry powder. So the total curry powder I'm supposed to add is 3 tablespoons. So I'm like, oh, okay, so I'll add the other tablespoon later. But then I read later into the recipe, and then it says, add rest of vegetables and remaining 2 tablespoons of curry powder. So now I'm like, well, do I need 4 tablespoons of curry powder? Or did the 3 tablespoons get misdivided? Should I add a tablespoon and a half and then a tablespoon and a half? Or should I only put in 1 with the first batch and 2 with the second batch? So I'm a little confused, and if you find a misprint in a recipe, it can be a little confusing. I think I'm gonna just use as much curry powder as I can, because honestly, I'm using more vegetables than the recipe called for, because once I start chopping, if it's got like a measurement like 3/4 of a cup of celery, if I've chopped up 3 stalks of celery and it ends up being a cup, that's just what I'm gonna use, because I'm not gonna put the rest of it away. Anyway, moving on, now that my oil is heated, I'm just gonna throw in the beets and the carrots. And this is also interesting about this recipe. The ingredients are not listed in the order that I'm actually adding them in. It's not a big deal, but just something that I'm like, oh, so the beets in the nope, the beets in the carrots. If you see the recipe, you'll know what I mean. Again, it's not bad, but sometimes when you're following a recipe and you've got that in front of you, you can get confused by the way it's written. Let's go ahead and add the beets. Oh yeah. I actually don't often use beets like by cooking them. I roast them a lot of times, and then sometimes I'll use them like fresh, like grated, or I'll steam them so I can puree them in something, but to actually saute them, I rarely do that. So it's something a little new for me. Carrots. And then I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of the curry. This is a hot curry blend from 360° Flavor and Spice, which is a small family-owned spice company in Geneva, Illinois. A friend of mine runs this company, and if you want to support her and support a small business, you can find her online and order online and have fresh spices delivered to you right in your own home. I do not get paid if you order spices from her. I just think it's good to, give a shout out to people who have private businesses, especially in this time when those could really use some support. I'm gonna put this in 2 tablespoons. Right away, you get that curry smell. And with spices, it is actually a good idea to add them in with like the oil and while you're sauteing vegetables, as opposed to waiting until after you've added liquid to something like a soup or stew, because it actually is gonna kind of cook the spices and allow the flavors to really bloom and come to life. So that's what's happening now. Now, I'm also supposed to add salt and pepper to taste. I'm gonna add probably a teaspoon of salt. I might need more, but I probably don't need less because there's a lot of vegetables here. We got that salt that's gonna need to cover them. And some pepper, just grind, it says to taste. So I don't know how much I'm gonna put in, just salt. Adding salt while you're sauteing vegetables actually helps to pull some of the moisture out of the vegetables so that they cook a little bit more quickly and their juices get extracted from the fibers and all of that. So it actually is beneficial until they start to brown, about 5 minutes. The next thing we're gonna do is add the rest of the vegetables, and once again, some curry. And we don't know exactly how much because the math isn't quite right in the recipe. We're gonna add a bunch of curry. The spice smells really good, so it's a really nice blend. Curries are made up of a variety of different spices, and so every curry blend that you get might be a little different. It might have slightly different proportions of certain spices or a slightly different combination. And of course, you can make your own blend if you want to, but buying a blend really is sort of the easier way to do it, because then you don't have to have like a multitude of spices and try to come up with a combination of your own. Now I'm gonna add in the rest of the vegetables. One of the vegetables is Granny Smith apple. I'm assuming that is also included in what they call vegetables because there's no place else to add. So I've got onions. Normally I would think to cook onions first, but I'm just following what the recipe says. Again, I always do it one way, but if a recipe gives you an idea about how to do it another way and you try it and you're like, hey, this is better than my way, then sometimes you can learn something by following a recipe, even if you are not a traditional recipe follower. But I am gonna go ahead and throw in the onion now. And this gets garlic and celery. And I got a bunch of other vegetables. I don't know what order I'm supposed to be adding them in. I also got potatoes, and since these are slightly harder, I think I'm gonna add these. And then I guess I'll add the apple. There's a lot of vegetables in here. P.S. You need a very big pot for this. There's a lot of stuff in here. Now, mushrooms and tomatoes, I would want to put them in later because they take less time to cook. But I'm just following this recipe, I guess. So I'll just put them in now when it says to put everything in, and we'll see how it turns out. This is part of my problem, is I think I'm smarter than the recipes, but probably I'm actually not. And now, more curry. Okay, there are so many vegetables in here, I honestly don't think they're ever going to brown. Maybe if I had more of a wider pan, but mine is really tall, so very few of them are actually gonna be on the bottom of this pan at a time. So I'm just gonna have to go with my gut here, and at the point where I think they're cooked-ish, I'm gonna call it and go on to the next step. All right, so I think my veggies have been cooking long enough. I'm going on to the next step, which says something about vegetable demi-glace. which is not in the ingredient list. And really, I think this is just referring to the stock. In the ingredient list, it just says 2 cups of vegetable stock. So if you are using some other method of preparing your vegetable stock, I think that's what it's referring to. And actually, I was sort of doing that because I made my vegetable stock by using about a tablespoon of miso in 2 cups of water. But basically, the goal here is to get your stock warmed up so that as you add it to your vegetables, it's not gonna like all cool down. So I've got this heated up, and I'm gonna add the liquid to the vegetables and simmer until all are tender but not mushy, about 20 minutes. And then I read the final ingredient, which says add tomatoes. So now I'm a little frustrated because earlier it said add the remaining vegetables. So I already added the tomatoes. And although I was skeptical that the tomatoes should really be added at that point, I did it anyway. And now I read the rest of the recipe and I realize that that was wrong. So there you go. I am not smart enough for this recipe apparently. But I'm gonna go ahead and add the liquid to it and hopefully it will survive my mistakes. Okay, so I have the liquid in there now, and that really is kind of all I gotta do, except for let it simmer now for about 20 minutes. I don't know if I'm supposed to simmer it covered or uncovered. I'm tempted to do covered because that will keep the liquid in and oftentimes create a little bit more heat in the form of steam inside the pan and cook things faster. But sometimes you actually want things to cook down. So it is helpful to actually know that, or frankly, just make a decision based on what you want. And I actually want this to cook up pretty fast. And I know that there are some really hard vegetables in there like beets and potatoes and carrot and even the onion. And I want to make sure that it's gonna get cooked through, not mushy, but cooked through. So I think I'm gonna cover this, but I'll let you know if that was a mistake perhaps later. Okay, so it's been more than 20 minutes that this has been simmering because I think it needed a little bit more time than that, but now we are going to dish it up and taste it.
Scurrying as long as I can hold out.
You know, the scurrying is
I'm so
ready.
hungry.
It's ready. I hope it's okay.
It took so long.
I know. I started cooking some rice, but it's not quite done yet because it does say to serve with rice, but oh no. It's gonna be really hot.
It's awfully red.
Be careful. Well, shockingly, the beets colored everything. You could put a scoop of rice down in there if you needed to. Yes. Which is gonna win out? The sensation in your tongue or the hunger in your stomach?
Sensation in my tongue.
It smells good. It smells like curry. It's mostly vegetables. I'm skeptical that it's gonna have like a rich, savory flavor to it, but oh, the rice is done.
Rice is done.
I want to taste just a little bit of it for seasoning though, because you never know if you would need to add more salt or anything like that. It's spicy, but that's about it. I'm not in love with this. Oh, well, it's lacking complexity.
It just tastes hot. Dominate.
It's kind of a single note.
Yeah.
That's frustrating because I really wanted to like this one.
What can you do? So this is a good teaching moment.
Okay.
What can you do when this happens? You follow a recipe, but it doesn't taste like much.
Well, curries are often made with an addition of something like coconut milk or something that's got some creaminess or fat to it. And I feel like that's really what's missing here, is that it's all astringent and spice. At the very least, we would need some kind of acid here.
Yes.
And there's no vinegar.
And a little salt.
And more salt. So I added like a teaspoon of salt, but it didn't give an amount to add. So I would have added more salt, maybe like some wine or some vinegar or something like that. But I think it really is just missing sort of a savory fat component.
So like yogurt you could toss in?
Maybe some yogurt,
Greek yogurt
would be good
toss
in
in?
there. And I did, of course, add like 4 tablespoons of curry powder, even though
That's
the
a lot.
recipe calls for 3. I would stick with 3 and add them however you want to, but don't add an extra tablespoon of curry powder.
Tune in.
Yeah.
We'll come back after we doctor.
So here's my recommendation, both as a connoisseur of dinner,
Food.
food, but also as a dietitian. So we added a decent portion of yogurt to this. Not only does the yogurt cut the spiciness, it also cuts the heat, like the actual heat, because the yogurt came out of the fridge and it was really hot. Yogurt is also going to add some protein, and we've added some brown rice as well, and a little bit more salt.
I tossed some wine in too.
Joe added a little bit of wine.
It's
I think
better.
if you want to add something like that, I would recommend adding it before it's done cooking, because it will actually take it down a little bit and incorporate it a little better. But that would be how I would modify this recipe. It can be frustrating sometimes when you follow a recipe to the T and it turns out not perfect. But there are things you can do, and this is why sometimes getting used to improvising in your kitchen can be useful, because sometimes even recipes aren't 100% perfect. It doesn't mean don't try them, but know how to adjust if your palate doesn't agree with the palate of the person who wrote the recipe.
It's not my favorite scurry, but it will at least be dinner.
Yeah, I actually really am enjoying it quite a bit with the yogurt in it. It's still pretty hot. But yeah, I think that rounds it out. I would also recommend something like coconut milk. That would not add protein, but it would add fat. And again, creaminess and a little bit more complexity. So see what you think. Enjoy experimenting with recipes and experimenting with improvisational cooking in your own kitchen. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to keep making some different dishes for you, giving you ideas and helping you to cook healthy at home. All right, take care. Bye-bye.